Welcome, everyone. Today we're venturing into the really fascinating world of Selkies, those mythical beings from Celtic and Norse folklore.
That's right. We've gathered some interesting bits to try and understand these creatures who seem to live between the human world and the wild sea.
At their heart, they're shapeshifters, aren't they? Able to switch between being a seal and being human.
Exactly. And the key is always that seal skin. It's essential for them to cross between those two forms. Their whole dual existence hinges on it.
It's quite something how deep these stories run in cultures with those Celtic and Norse connections, particularly, it seems, in the Northern Isles of Scotland. Orkney and Shetland pop up a lot.
Oh, definitely. Those places seem to be hotspots. The oral traditions there have kept these stories alive for ages. And the name itself, Selkie, gives a clue.
From the Scots word for seal, I believe?
That's the one, though you might see it spelled different ways too. Silkies, silkies, selkies, but they all point to the same creature.
And they're not straightforwardly good or evil, are they? There's this ambiguity.
Precisely. Sometimes helpful, sometimes quite dangerous, actually. Capable of vengeance, even, and almost always described as very attractive when they're in human form.
Which often leads into that common storyline, the romance angle.
Yes, that allure seems central. The tales frequently explore relationships between Selkies and humans. And often there's this profound sense of longing involved, especially the Selkies pull back towards the ocean.
So let's talk about that word selkie. We know it's linked to the Scots for seal, but is there more detail there?
There is. In Scots, Selkie is technically a diminutive of Selch. And Selch, well, that specifically means the gray seal. So it has a pretty precise starting point in the natural world.
Interesting. And those different spellings you mentioned.
Right. Selkie, Silky, Silky.
Mm.
Loads of variations, but all stemming from that root term, Selch.
Was it always clear-cut what a selkie was, though? Or was there some, disagreement?
Oh, there was definitely discussion. Alan Bruford, for instance, suggested Selkie might have just meant any seal, not necessarily one that could transform. A broader meaning, perhaps.
So maybe just seeing a seal could have been enough to trigger these kinds of stories for some, but others really pushed for a distinction.
They did. W. Trail Dennison was quite firm about it. He insisted Selkie should only refer to the Shapeshifters and shouldn't be lumped in with merfolk. He actually called out Samuel Hibbert for doing just that, conflating the two earlier on.
But then if you look at somewhere like Iceland, the lines get blurry again.
They do seem to. In some Icelandic traditions, seal wives are referred to as merfolk marmenlar. So different cultures might have viewed them through slightly different mythological lenses.
And what about finfolk, another term you sometimes hear? Same thing.
Another area where it gets a bit tangled, especially it seems in Shetland. Dennison argued that mixing up Selkies and Finfolk mostly happened in Shetland, and that Orkney kept them more separate. He saw the Selkies' underwater world as distinct from Finfolkaheme, where the Finfolk supposedly lived.
But that separation wasn't universally accepted.
No, Bruford questioned Dennison's neat division there, so the boundaries weren't always crystal clear.
And this links somehow to the Norse idea of Finns being shapeshifters.
Exactly. The words Finns and Finfolk seem to have been used almost interchangeably in Shetland dialect for these sea dwellers who could, take off their seal skin and become human. There's even an account from a local observer describing this belief.
How did Gaelic traditions handle them? Did they have a specific word just for Selkies?
Not always a distinct one, no. Often they're sort of grouped under the umbrella of mermaids. The common term you find across Scottish, Gaelic, Irish, Manx is Maidin Mara, or similar variations, basically maiden of the sea.
Which usually means mermaid.
Right, but the figures in these Gaelic stories very often have those seal-like traits we associate with Selkies. There's a less common term, Maidin Ran, seal maiden, but Maidin Mara is much more prevalent. It suggests maybe a more fluid concept of these sea beings in Gaelic lore.
Okay, it really does sound like the Northern Isles, Orkney, and Shetland are ground zero for Selkie stories.
They really are central. A huge number of the classic Selkie folktales come from those islands.
And in Orkney, it wasn't just any seal that was thought to be a potential Selkie, was it? Size mattered.
That's correct. Sometimes in Orkney, the term Selkie was used more specifically for larger types of seals, bigger than the common gray seal, perhaps Greenland seals or crested seals. These were the ones believed to be the Selkie folk with the power to transform.
And Shetland had something similar with even bigger seals.
Yes, the Shetland tradition suggested mermen, and mermaids preferred the shape of these larger seals, which they called half-fish. So in both island groups, there seems to have been this association between larger, maybe less common seals, and the ability to shapeshift.
Right, let's get into that really famous narrative type. The Selkie wife and the human lover. This one feels, well, fundamental.
It's a cornerstone, absolutely. The classic setup is a man finds a female Selkie ashore. She's taken off her skin. He steals it.
Often driven by desire, presumably.
Often, yes. And without her skin, she can't go back to the sea, so she's basically forced to marry him.
Which sets up a pretty difficult dynamic from the start. How does she cope in this human life?
Well, typically, she's depicted as constantly yearning for the sea, always gazing out at the water. She might even have children with the human husband, but that connection to her true home, the ocean, it never fades. It's a real clash of worlds.
In finding the hidden skin, that's usually the turning point, isn't it?
It is. The moment she finds it, whether she stumbles upon it herself or maybe one of the children finds it for her, her return to the sea is immediate, instantaneous.
Often leaving the human family behind.
Yes, often abandoning her husband and children. It really underlines how powerful her Selkie nature is, overriding even maternal bonds in many versions.
It sounds incredibly sad, actually. Are there variations on this basic plot?
Oh, plenty. Sometimes there's the detail that she already had a Selkie partner in the sea before she was captured. In some, maybe softer, children's versions, she might come back once a year to visit. But in the more traditional, starker tales, she's usually gone for good in human form.
There's that really poignant detail sometimes about the children seeing her afterwards, isn't there?
Yes, that's a heartbreaking touch in some versions. She's never seen as a human again. But her children might occasionally encounter a large seal near the shore that seems to look at them sorrowfully, as if acknowledging them, implying it's her.
But it wasn't only female Selkies. The lore includes male ones, too.
Indeed. Male Selkies are often described as incredibly handsome, almost irresistible in human form, and they tend to target human women who are maybe unhappy or dissatisfied wives of fishermen away at sea, that sort of thing. It plays on themes of desire, temptation, escape.
And that strange rumor about Ursula in Orkney? How she could supposedly contact a male Selkie.
Ah, the Ursula's rumor. Likely just local gossip. But the story went that if she wanted to get in touch with her Selkie lover, she'd go down to the shore and cry 7 tears into the sea. It adds this almost ritualistic, personal element to it.
It's fascinating how these stories sometimes seem to explain real-world physical anomalies.
Exactly. There's this recurring belief that children born from human Selkie unions might have physical markers, like webbed hands or feet. There are Shetland accounts of a mermaid's children having skin between their fingers.
And the Ursula children rumor.
Right. It was said her children had a sort of horny webbing between their fingers and toes that needed to be trimmed periodically. W. Trail Dennison, who apparently had some family connection, noted that some descendants did seem to have these traits. It shows how people tried to find tangible proof for these myths.
So people were looking for physical signs. What about the rules for transformation? Could they just change whenever they wanted?
Apparently not always. Some legends tied it to specific times, like when the tides were just right. But how often they could transform seems to vary a lot between stories.
Like the Ursula's rumor again.
Yes, they mention the male Selkie promising to visit her at the 7th stream, which means the spring tide. Again, that number 7 pops up.
And in the Great Silkie of Sewell Skerry, that famous ballad, 7 is important too, isn't it?
It is. The Selkie husband in the ballad promises to return for his son after 7 years have passed. 7 is just one of those numbers that appears again and again in folklore and ballads, often signifying something magical or a completed cycle.
There's also a darker theory about why they couldn't become human very often.
Yes, more theological explanation, perhaps. One idea was that they could only take human form, say, once every 7 years, because their seal bodies were prisons for condemned souls. Or, alternatively, that they were humans who'd committed some terrible sin or even fallen angels. That would explain their liminal state and limited time on land. It adds this whole layer of sin and judgment to the myth.
That's a much heavier origin than just being magical sea creatures. It must have affected how people actually treated seals.
It definitely seems to have. There was often a real reluctance in the Scottish Isles to kill seals, a strong belief that doing so would bring bad luck, maybe even disaster.
Didn't Ernest Marwick tell a story about that? A crofter who killed a seal?
He did. A story from Orkney about crofters putting sheep out to graze on small islands. One summer, a man put 7 sheep on an isle. On his way back, he killed a seal, just, maybe opportunistically. That very night, all 7 of his sheep vanished without a trace.
But the other crofter's sheep were fine.
Exactly. Theirs were untouched, It was seen as direct retribution for killing the seal. Shows how strong that superstition could be.
It's amazing how specific these Selkie wife tales could be to particular islands. You said nearly every island in Orkney had one.
That's what W. Trail Dennison found. The basic story was everywhere in Orkney, but each place seemed to have its own little twists, its own local flavor.
Can you give an example? How might an Orkney version differ?
Well, take the North Ronaldsay version. A bachelor steals a Selkie skin. While he's away, she's desperately searching for it, and eventually her youngest daughter helps her find it, having seen her father hide it under the roof thatch.
Ah, so the child plays a key role.
Yes, highlighting that family connection, even in separation. Then there's the Dearness version from mainland Orkney. The husband locks the skin in a sea chest, hides the key. The wife almost seems resigned, saying it's better to keep her Selkie days out of her mind.
But that doesn't last.
No. The moment she eventually finds the skin, she's gone. Throws off her human clothes, straight back to the sea. Suggests that longing was always there, just maybe suppressed.
So even within Orkney, there are these nuances. What about Shetland? Similar stories there.
Shetland had a rich tradition, too. Samuel Hibbert recorded one from Unst way back in 1822. A man forces a mermaid, who seems to be a Selkie type, to marry him by stealing her seal skin. But a key detail in that version is she already had a Selkie husband waiting for her.
Oh, that adds another layer of conflict. Divided loyalties.
Exactly. And Shetland had other kinds of Selkie stories, too. Tales of them luring people into the sea around midsummer, never to be seen again. There's also this general idea that in their underwater homes, the sea folk were basically human-like breathing air, but they absolutely needed their specific seal skin to become seals and travel to the surface. Each skin was unique, irreplaceable.
That ballad, The Great Silpy of Silscary, really captures that dual nature.
It perfectly sums it up. I'm a man upon the land, I'm a Selkie at the sea, living in two worlds. And Shetland also had tales, like Marwick recorded, of women having strange babies after encounters with Selkies, again blurring those boundaries.
And that story, Geoga's son, that sounds more like a direct, almost violent clash.
It is quite different. Fishermen ambush seals resting on the vid scaries, kill some, take their skins, only to realize they were actually seal folk.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. The bloodshed causes a huge wave, stranding one fisherman. The seal folk, now in human form but grieving and skinless, make a bargain. One of them, Geoga, offers to carry the fishermen back to Papa Stewart, but only if they get their skins back. It's a story about conflict, consequences, and negotiation.
It's remarkable how these themes aren't just confined to Scotland or the Northern Isles. You mentioned parallels elsewhere.
Absolutely. These seal bride tales, they're recognized as a migratory folktale type. ML 4080 is the classification. They're seen as related to the whole swan maiden motif, which you find all over the world.
So it's a widespread archetype.
Definitely. Hundreds of these seal bride stories have been collected, stretching from Ireland all the way to Iceland. There's even a rare one from Norway. It clearly tapped into something universal about transformation and relationships with the other.
That idea of marrying a shapeshifter who longs for their true home resonates widely then.
It really does. You find similar beliefs about seal folk in the Faroe Islands. There are seal shapeshifters in Swedish legends. Even, interestingly, a Chinook story from North America about a boy turning into a seal. It shows this global fascination with human-animal transformation.
Let's look at Iceland specifically. What were their Selkie stories like?
Well, they have tales like Selshamarin, which means the seal skin. It follows that classic pattern. Man takes seal woman's skin, forces her to marry him, but in this version, she eventually finds the key to the chest where he hid it, and she goes back to the sea to be reunited with her original seal fiancé.
So emphasizing her prior attachment.
Yes, and her ultimate loyalty to her own kind. Then there's a 17th century account from John Gudmundsson the Learned. He called them Marmenlar, sea-dwelling elves, essentially mermen and mermaids. Again, a man steals a skin while they're dancing on shore, forces the owner to marry him. They have kids, but she never loves him. Finds the skin, escapes. Same underlying theme of coercion and lack of genuine connection.
Even the explorer Nansen recorded an Icelandic version.
He did. Fridtjof Nansen. His version involves a man finding a seal woman weeping because he took her skin. He marries her, they have children, but one day she finds the skin hidden away and immediately returns to the sea, leaving them. It reinforces that inescapable pull of her true nature.
And wasn't there a more sinister figure in Iceland, Salkolla?
Ah, yes. Sokola's sealhead.
Hmm?
That's a bit different, more of a medieval demonic woman figure who had some seal-like attributes. A much darker, more monstrous take on the human seal link, perhaps. A more distant parallel.
Okay, moving across to the Faroe Islands. The story of the Copaconan, that one's really well known, isn't it?
Extremely famous, yes. The Copaconan, the seal woman. On the 13th night, a farmer sees Selkies dancing, steals one woman's skin, makes her his wife. They have children. Eventually, years later, she finds the key to the chest with her skin and escapes back to the sea.
But the story doesn't end there, does it? It gets darker.
It does. Later, the villagers, including her human husband, go on a seal hunt and kill her Selkie husband and her two Selkie sons. When the farmer brings home parts of the catch, she appears in the night, enraged, and places a powerful curse on the men of the village that they will fall from cliffs or drown until enough have died to link arms around the whole island.
Wow, that's a powerful curse. Adds a real element of consequence.
Huge consequence. Some people there apparently still attribute local misfortunes to this curse. It shows the lasting power of the legend. It's inspired modern works, too, like Gordon Bach's song Peter Kagan and the Wind and Russell Christian's song Copaconan.
And Ireland, how did Selkie traditions appear there?
Well, in Irish folklore, sometimes the figures called mermaids, or marrow, seem to have been thought of as seal women. There's a story from Tralee, County Kerry, claiming the local Lee family descended from a man who married a Murdoch, a mermaid, who eventually left him to go back to her seal husband in the sea, which strongly suggests she was one of the seal folk.
Again, that theme of divided lives. And didn't some Irish families claim direct descent from seals?
Yes, the Connolly clan in Connemara traditionally believed they were descended from seals. Because of this, it was taboo for them to kill seals. It would bring bad luck. It's even said the name Connolly became so linked with seals that many changed their surname to Connolly to avoid the association.
Fascinating. And there's even a place name connection.
Right. Rowenish, meaning Seal Island off the coast of Donegal, the landscape itself reflects the folklore.
We keep coming back to this idea of physical traits in the children of Selkies. That seems really persistent.
It really is. The notion that offspring of human Selkie unions would have telltale signs is very common. David Thompson wrote about the belief that children of male Selkies and human women might have webbed fingers and toes, sometimes with a sort of rough patch if the webbing was cut.
Trying to rationalize difference again, perhaps.
Possibly. And Ernest Marwick, again, he collected some striking stories. One about a woman who, after being with a Selkie man, gave birth to a son with a seal's face. Though a dream later led her to find silver, interestingly.
A seal's face. That's quite extreme.
Very. He also described a whole group of people thought to be Selkie descendants who supposedly had this odd greenish-white, cracked skin that smelled a bit fishy. These vivid descriptions show how folklore could become attached to real people with unusual appearances or conditions.
So these weren't just abstract tales for bedtime. They seem to connect to lived experience, or at least perceived experience. Which brings us to the origins. Where did these ideas actually come from?
Well, historically, before we had scientific explanations, unusual births or traits were often attributed to the supernatural fairies, or in this case, Selkies. You see that with the Macodrum clan in the Outer Hebrides, the Macodrums of the seals. They claimed Selkie blood, partly to explain syndactyly, a condition where fingers or toes are fused, making them look a bit like flippers. Folklore provided a narrative.
But there are also more, shall we say, down-to-earth theories involving encounters with other human groups.
Yes, definitely. David McGritchie suggested that early Scots settlers might have encountered and maybe even married Finnish or Sami women. These women used sealskin kayaks and wore sealskin clothing, which could easily have been misinterpreted by people unfamiliar with them.
So mistaken identity, essentially.
Plausibly. Others point specifically to sightings of Finmen who were actually Inuit from Greenland or Canada, traveling astonishing distances in their skin kayaks. Seeing these figures in waterproof animal skin gear emerging from the sea, maybe drying their kayaks and closing on rocks, you could see how a belief in humans transforming from seals might arise. It offers a kind of rational explanation for the myth's roots.
That feels quite compelling. Any other theories floating around?
There was a less likely one about shipwrecked spanning sailors, their dark hair maybe resembling seals when washed ashore. But the anthropologist A. Asbjørn Jen emphasizes that there's also a strong thread in the lore itself, suggesting a more spiritual origin, the idea that Selkies are, in fact, the souls of people who drowned.
Ah, connecting it to death and the sea.
Exactly. Linking the myth to beliefs about the afterlife, the power to the ocean, and transformation after death.
It's truly amazing how these ancient figures, these Selkies, still echo in our culture today.
They absolutely do. You have modern literary takes like George Mackay Brown's Sealskin, and Selkies pop up constantly in novels, songs, films. Although, it has to be said, their portrayal often strays quite far from the original folklore.
We've seen them in things like the young adult novel A Stranger Came Ashore, films like The Secret of Roan Inish, which is quite faithful in spirit, and Ondine, which plays with the idea, even animation like Song of the Sea.
Right. And TV shows like Lost Girl use Selkie characters, video games like a Highland song. They just keep reappearing, capturing the imagination in new ways, showing how enduring these archetypes are.
It's clear these stories have a lasting hold on us. We've traced them from their Celtic and Norse roots, looked at their shape-shifting nature, the core story of the stolen skin, and how these tales echo across cultures, from Scotland and Ireland to Iceland and the Faroes.
And those recurring themes, transformation, that inescapable pull of the sea, the complex, often painful relationships between humans and these beings from another realm, they seem to touch on something fundamental about how we view nature, the wild, and our own place within it all.
Maybe take a moment to think about why these particular stories about beings who belong to both the land and the sea still resonate so much. Perhaps it taps into our own connection to the natural world, maybe a sense of mystery about what lies just beyond our everyday experience, hidden beneath the waves.